Okay, so trying to think about what the key things that we want to sort of express and have a conversation with you today. Obviously, safeguarding is a huge area, and safeguarding for me, the actual word is quite emotive. Like, what do we actually mean by safeguarding? For me, it's about the well-being. Everybody has a right to go about their business and not have any kind of harm or vulnerability caused to them. But we know as humans that sometimes we do have periods for a whole host of different reasons where we have really challenging times. So it's thinking about our roles and responsibilities within our church context. How do we ensure that we create those healthy communities, healthy relationships, so that people feel that they can come forward even when. I learned really quickly when I joined in 2017 that the church as an organisation for me is really unique. Why are we unique? Well, we are open door. That means that we welcome all, absolutely anybody and everybody into our church family. But that in itself can also bring really different challenges because we're trying to manage a whole host of different expectations. So again, in our roles, thinking about how do we initiate and maintain those relationships that creates that healthy, safe culture environment. What does that look like when I come into your parishes? How do we know that we're creating that environment? What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What are we observing? So that means that there's lots of different dynamics, different expectations. So we really need to be thinking about that. Some people will come into our church buildings, they just want to sit very quietly, perhaps at the back, place of solace and comfort. Other people want to be more interactive. They want to join our tea or our coffee mornings. They want to engage with us. Some people want to participate in our activities. Other people want to attend our activities. So all of those dynamics and different expectations. So key to this is going to be our communication, our conversations with one another. So again, thinking about how we do that. So to try and to ensure some consistency with that, the Church of England, particularly over the last 3 to 4 years, who have been on a massive journey thinking about how we respond to the independent inquiries into child sexual abuse, there's been lots and lots of different policies. So one of the key ones I'm going to advocate for you today in your churchwarden roles is the Code of Safer Practice, which came out in 2021. Are people aware of this? Have people seen it? Okay, what are people's understanding of what that practice is? And we also have a duty of care to everybody within our church, and that means us in our roles. So we have a duty of care towards you as church wardens. It's really important that we think about how we engage with people. It needs to be a meaningful engagement. Sometimes we assume that we've all got that same common set of values and beliefs, but if we don't have conversations and check out with one another, we're not going to know. So it's thinking about how we respectively engage, how we verbally and non-verbally give that message that people are going to be listened and heard and responded to when they come into our church communities. So your Code of Safer Working Practice is going to be one of your key documents to just make yourself familiar with, because that's where we're going to get the consistency across our parishes. Absolutely, in the diocese there's diversity of need, but our interactions, that's where we need to have the consistency with one another. We have put the Code of Safer Working Practices, we've summarised the key points in your packs, and after today they're also going to be sent out and emailed to you. So again, thinking also about how we share our Code of Safer Working policies with our members of congregation. So are we talking about them? Are we, making references to them? So again, part of advertising our policies and procedures is making sure that people know what our key core principles are relied on. And people can sometimes come to us with a very fixed thought about how we're going to respond to them. So because we do welcome all, and like I said, people trying to manage all of those different dynamics. So in our conversations, we need to be really open and transparent about when it is our role and responsibility to respond, and when we're sometimes better to sign on and refer on or redirect people to other areas. So thinking about what comes under our umbrella of pastoral care. So we have a duty to ensure everybody's safety and well-being, but actually that doesn't mean that we have to be everything to everybody who makes those requests. when people do come forward and share stories with us, it can be really emotive. And it's really important when I say, pastoral care to ourselves, that's a really good example. So COVID, I realised very quickly that my vulnerability during COVID is I am a people's person. I thrive on physical interaction. So I personally really, really struggled. And so when I was trying to still support people via Zoom and telephone conversations, I became really aware about the emotional impact that was having on me, and not having those opportunities to talk to colleagues like Sarah, to support one another within that period. So it's really, really important that even when people come and approach you, never feel that you've got to manage that on your own in isolation. The best outcomes and decision making is always going to be when we do them together. When we come together, we share information. Obviously, we have to be mindful of confidentiality, but we come together, we share that information, we decide what, if any, next steps have to happen. So we take accountability jointly. We don't want to overwhelm anybody. I know sometimes parish safeguarding officers, that is a huge volunteering role now. Yes, they have oversight of safeguarding, but they need everybody's contribution to make sure that our churches are a much safer and healthier place. And also that recognition that we are humans, we are fallible. Sometimes we get things wrong. And that's okay. We learn from it, we evolve, we look at what's gone well, what do we need to be doing more of, and where do we need to be making some changes. So that's why we encourage those discussions with one another, the review of your activities, making sure you've got your risk assessments, all of those processes and procedures. That's how we're going to be looking after one another. Well, if someone comes along, yes, we've got our policies and they're our foundations, but we don't get the person, we don't put them in a book of a policy and close it, do we? No, we don't put policies around people. We are around. We are the support network. But it's being mindful of who else needs to come in on this journey, whether that's referring to other agencies, it might be someone else in the pastoral team, it might be us in the safeguarding team. We never work in isolation within that context. How do we know? How would you know that you're doing meaningful engagements? How would you know that you're creating culture in your parishes where people do feel that they can come forward even when they're ready? Because what we do know is from both conversations and research that people will watch and observe us for an awfully long time before they're brave enough to come forward. People need to know that they're going to be seen and heard and responded to. So what would you hope if you were holding up a mirror or you were videoing yourself, what would you hope people would see in you? So even our body language. So if I'm sort of standing here like this, frowning, side on, thinking about how am I inviting you to come into my space, to have a conversation with me. Our non-verbal language is quite powerful. I'm really mindful. You will often know what I'm thinking and feeling, perhaps not by me verbally saying it, but by my non-verbal presentation. I have to be really mindful of that as well. And sometimes when I'm feeling kind of stressed or upset myself. But again, thinking about how we present ourselves, the power of language, the words that we use, that encouraging, making sure that we're not, having a conversation where people feel, oh, this is someone I'm not going to be able to align myself with. This person's not going to have a sense of where I am. So just being really, really mindful of the language that we do, thinking about those first responses. I've sometimes had people come up to me and say, Sharon, have you got a minute? And without even thinking, I've gone, oh, if it's really quick. So already I'm kind of unconsciously setting that scene of Sharon's not got time. So again, just thinking about how those initial first responses are, because people will only attempt to come forward once. And if they don't get the right response at the right time, they are really unlikely to try again, share their story or their conversation. So what's going to be really important in the context of confidentiality? What do we need to be saying?
always.
But what we can do is that we can always consult and feed back to them. People will often be less resistant to their information being shared if you've been really open about why you want to share it and who you're going to share it with. So that's about recognising it's their story, it's their journey, it's their participation. Your engagement may be with them at the beginning, at the middle of someone's experience or journey, or at the end. We're not always often with someone throughout that whole period, and that's okay. But we need to be in our conversations being really open and honest about what we can do, when we need to share information, who we're going to share information with, and why. So we always work on that principle of consent and consultation. The safeguarding team at the diocese, we can always be phoned up for that what if conversation. But again, don't be afraid to say to the person, I want to support you, but to ensure I'm supporting you in the best possible way, I need to go and speak to somebody else. And this is why I need to do it. And this is kind of what I'm going to be sharing. Are you okay with that? Again, we're reflecting back with them what we're planning to do in relation to the next steps. What else? And that's hard, isn't it, when we sometimes have those environments, because we need to challenge that, don't we? But that doesn't always put us in a very comfortable position to do that, because we don't want to cause upset. We don't want to, the word challenge in itself, can be quite worrying. But part of that code of safer working practice is about ensuring that we are seeing and hearing, that we are doing that respectful engagement. So we do need to be checking out with one another if and when we hear those kind of scenarios. We need to be taking that back to our pastoral teams and thinking about actually, why is that happening? Why are we creating that culture? Again, go back to that principle of someone walking through your doors and they don't know anybody. What are they going to hear, see and observe within that? So that's really, really important. So that for me is about giving ourselves permission to be curious with one another and inviting one another to hold ourselves as accountable, to think about, again, as humans, we like routines, we like to be doing the same thing the same way, because that makes us feel safe and secure. But actually, if we aren't open to reviewing our process, reviewing how we're doing things, checking out with one another, that's also how we learn. If we don't do that, then we become really complacent. And what ends up is that often we're doing things that aren't always in the best interests of everybody who comes through our church doors, and also often not reflective of our church policies. So that is a really, really important one, and ties in lovely with what I was saying earlier about, people will observe us before they come forward. So we need to hold ourselves accountable, but also not being afraid to actually have those conversations with one. So one of the things we often get talked about when referrals do come through to us is people worrying that they're going to get it wrong if people come forward to them. People saying, I don't feel confident, I haven't got those skills. What I would want to express to you today is that if someone has approached you, then they have seen something in you that has given them reassurance that you are going to hear them and see them. Don't underestimate your communication. Communication is an interaction. The minute you engage with someone, you are supporting them. And as I said, it might be a brief conversation, it might be someone signing on, you might end up offering a lot more pastoral care, but don't underestimate your communication. They've seen something in you. That means that they've felt that this is a parish, this is a safe environment to do that. So don't undervalue yourselves, particularly in your churchwarden roles, particularly if you end up being in a parish where you're interregnum. And so people will be looking towards you as churchwardens to take a lot more roles and responsibility. So again, don't be worried about that. That's, myself, Sarah, and the other members of the safeguarding team are absolutely here to support you. But take comfort that your communication has expressed to someone they think that you're going to be open to supporting them. Managing expectations, I think that's really important. I've referenced that kind of already, but just again, being mindful of what is our role and responsibilities. We need to be really open and honest with people when we're having those conversations. As I said, when we're inviting anybody and everybody through our door, it can sometimes feel like a seesaw that, there's lots of different dynamics going on, lots of different relationships, but we do need to be having those open and honest conversations with people about whether this is or isn't our responsibility. And again, if you're not sure, then that's the time then you can pick up and speak to the safeguarding team and say, I'm not sure about this. And that's okay. We're not asking anybody to be experts. You pay your parish shares for the safeguarding team, so that's why we're here. We're here to support you, to think about next steps, to think about what's going to be the next course of action to fully support those people. And it's not always in the extreme context of safeguarding. It's not always about where harm's been caused. I'm feeling really vulnerable today because I've got a really huge leak on my roof at home. That's creating a lot of anxiety for me. So it's not always in the context about safeguarding. It can be, if someone's poor health, things going on at work. It's not always the more extreme cases of neglect. Bereavement's huge. There's so many losses within bereavement. So it could be lots of things. So again, that's why it's really important to check out with people what their story is. I also find that when people come forward, because we're often not emotionally involved, it's really sometimes as a human, and I'm the worst culprit for it, I'm already thinking 5 or 10 steps ahead because I'm not emotionally involved. Sometimes I'm in the 4th gear and someone's still in 1st gear. So it's about their pace, going at their time. So keep reflecting back. Is this helpful? Is this unhelpful? What are your hopes in this communication for me? What are you looking for today? Don't be afraid to invite that as part of your pastoral care conversations. Keep checking back with them. Am I going too fast? Is this helpful? Is this unhelpful? Would it be helpful for me to write this conversation back to you? People process information very different. I'm a very visual person, so I will often write things down. So if you ever phone up and speak to me in relation to a safeguarding concern, I will always email it back to you in a summary. We'll always do that. And that can also be helpful when you're engaging with people who have had trauma or really horrible experiences. That's sometimes helpful for them as part of their process. So again, thinking creatively, what's going to be most helpful for you? Because we're all different, aren't we? We're all individual, and we all function very differently. So again, respectful and meaningful engagement, but not being afraid to say, I don't feel that I can support you on this next bit, but what I can do is I can talk to you about who's probably better placed to do that for you. Recording, everybody aware of the recording templates and logs? A few nods and a few not. I'm not proposing when people come forward to you that you suddenly say, pause it there, let me get a pen and a paper. We're not going to do that because that's creating a barrier, and that can be really, can feel really unsafe for people. But if people approach you with a safeguarding concern or conversation, we do need to be letting them know that we need to record that. It's really, really important. It's also one of our biggest latest criticisms is that we're not recording things, and we need to. So please use your recording templates. Make sure that you're feeding back to your parish safeguarding officers so they know who's approached you, what the concerns are, letting the person know that you are recording that information, and where that information is going to be stored. Quite often what happens is when you phone the safeguarding team, you might say, I'm not really sure whether this is something to be concerned about. Sometimes we will often check our records and there's been other concerns, other recordings, and suddenly what seemed really small and minor and perhaps not very significant becomes a little bit more of a jigsaw puzzle. A piece of jigsaw doesn't really do much on its own in isolation, but when you start bringing pieces together, who else has had conversations? Is there themes coming identified? So again, please do record on your recording log templates, sign dates, avoid your acronyms. Again, there's lots of guidance on the Diocese Feely website, on the safeguarding page. So please do take the opportunity to have a look at those pages, just so that you're making yourself a bit more familiar with those kind of key processes. power dynamics. The last kind of thing I just wanted to reference. What do people think I mean by power dynamics? Yeah, there are always elements of power in all of our relationships. So I'm standing up here, I could waffle on, and then if Richard is trying to say, time out, Sharon, I've got the stage, I could still just ignore Richard. I wouldn't dare do that to an archdeacon, but I could. So it's about recognising the power that we hold in our roles, thinking about how we receive power, how are we perceived to have power, how do we use power? Are we using power through our language? Are we using power through our positions? So we do need to be really aware of the power dynamics that play in relationships. And often when people come forward in the context of having had harm caused to them, it will 99%, there will always be elements where there has been a misuse of power, and a misuse where people's voices are not heard, people are not seen, people are oppressed. If we misuse our power when we're engaging with one another, then we're not doing a person-centred approach. That means we're not starting where the person is. And that can become really abusive within that context. We need to be aware of those power dynamics that we play. Even how we're sitting today, how we sit around a table. You know, is someone sitting at the top, which suggests, thinking about, often we, as soon as a member of clergy comes into the room, we will shift, we will respond to people that we're engaging with. And so we need to be really, really mindful of that. So that's a really important example. So it's really important. When I was talking earlier about not working in isolation and making sure that you are pastorally supported, making sure that you're meeting with your colleagues, having a cup of tea, just having that opportunity to share what's going really well in your parishes and you need to be doing more of, but what are the challenges? What are the difficulties? Let's come together and work those out together. And we absolutely need to be making sure that we have a voice of when we're worried or when we feel we're being or cursed, or actually, am I being positioned? And often that can happen. Not always consciously, sometimes that just happens unconsciously. But again, that theme of communication is going to be really key. Yeah, and we absolutely know that unfortunately our kind of theology and scripture has on lots of occasions been misused in a way that has oppressed or caused harm. So that's a whole nother subject, but there is again lots of literature around now. There's lots of information on websites there.
The quality assurance documents and the actual headings are a way of making sure we examine the way we are doing things. What are we doing well? What can we improve on? It has, you see on there, various headings in prevention, culture, leadership, capacity, responding to survivors, etc. So analysing how we're doing things. It's not enough to put those policies and procedures in place and not bothering to review them. They go out of date. They become irrelevant to the work that we're doing because our activities change. A lot of the information I'm going to give you is in your packs. So, for example, your responsibilities is in your packs. Now, obviously, you have that responsibility with the incumbent and the PCC to ensure that safeguarding is carried out in your parishes, but your responsibilities increase during an interregnum. You've got to make sure that those risk assessments are carried out, the insurance is adequate, that there's the complaints procedure in place. There's a sample copy in your pack on a complaint procedure. So your responsibilities increase and you need to be aware of that and not hope that somebody else is doing it. We're around in the safeguarding team to advise you and help you through that. The other things that we have in place, obviously I've put the building on there that indicates the whole of the diocesan team, not just safeguarding, but everybody else are there to help you. That's what we're paid to do. So please use us. We don't want to be sitting there twiddling our thumbs, not that we really get a chance to do that anyway. But we have also the House of Bishops policies. They're our go-to guide. What do we do if? How do we do that? So please use that. The other thing that we have, obviously, we have our commitments there of how we're going to carry out safeguarding, but there's also the dashboard, and I'm going to be sticking around when you've got these question and answer panel later. So if you've got any specific questions about the dashboard and please do ask me. But it's there as a tool to help parish safeguarding officers keep a check on everything that needs to be in place in the parish, from policy and procedures, role descriptions, risk assessments, training, DBS checks. It's a tool to aid the parish with the work that needs to be done. And lastly, you've got all our contact details there. Rebecca, our team leader, is there. Sharon, obviously, Lisa, and the rest of the team as well. Myself and Jackie and Kelly, we're all there to support you.